Letting Go, Perspectives on Death and Dying, with Erik Peper, biofeedback researcher and professor at San Francisco State University, and Mrs. Dora Kunz, teacher of therapeutic touch and president of the Theosophical Society in America.
How do we deal, or how do we relate to a dying child? How do we relate to a spouse? What do we do if we have a long chronic illness where every day we wake up and know that yet we're still becoming yet weaker and weaker, experience more pain, and death is just beyond the door? Or what happens when we're faced with a very quick traumatic death? What can we do as family members? What can we do as health providers? Because at least in our present Western culture, it seems that death is the final moment. Now, from your perspective, what is different and what happens during the dying process?
I think from my perspective, a person is more than the body which dies and passes on. I mean, disintegrates. I think each person has or is an Atman, point of consciousness, and other terminology is soul. But besides, some part of the personality as we know it in this world also survives and goes to a different consciousness, which we can often call, and is now popularly called, the astral world, or astral consciousness. Now, in the physical body, of course, slowly, I think a person who is dying starts to disassociate himself very slowly, because partly it's a leaking out of energy or vitality, and he turns inward. He does not react so much with his physical environment, even with the people he loves. And with this inward process, at the dying moment, slowly this link with the soul through the head center leaves the body, and first of all, there is very little vitality at this point left in the physical body, which becomes a shell with the remnants of etheric energy, which also slowly dissipates. If you have died of cancer, you're not going to have, in this new environment, cancer. If you have other genetic defects, they will not be there in this other world. But of course, it takes time to get used to a new build-up without the physical defects. I mean, your consciousness previously has been so concentrated on the cancer or the physical defects that to begin to feel different, that when you do not have it, will take a time of transition.
After that transition, what happens?
I think the person remains the same in personality. Everybody is selfish, so some of the selfishness remains in one. But I think if one is selfish, some people are completely narrow-minded and very narrow in their interests. Mm-hmm. They will remain that way. But people who have many, many interests, in other words, have a very greatly expanding world to explore. All this is, to a certain extent, to people who are not prepared, a shock, particularly the people who have never thought about life after death, because they have to adjust to the lack of gravitation, to the lack of being able to communicate directly to the people they see. I think most people, drawn by the sorrow of those left behind, are sort of drawn by that strength of emotion back to the people they have associated with or close to. And therefore they get a reaction to the sorrow or the whatever emotion is felt to the people. And also slowly they get a different perception of the person.
Let me clarify that. That isn't totally clear. Are you saying that as the person dies, their consciousness is then in another place, in a way, another level,
Yeah.
and that in some way they still feel and perceive the emotions or the feeling tone of the people who are still alive?
Yes, they do, I think.
And how does if the people who are alive are very strongly grieving, how does that affect the person who has died?
It makes them feel very hopeless because there is no way they can communicate with them. And they often, that's a period of sorrow for them, which relates to the people sorrowing, because except in dreams, sometimes people do have dreams of those who have passed over, and they can communicate through the dream life. But otherwise, in most cases, there is no way they can convince people that they are alive, except, of course, in the thousands of instances which the Society of Psychical Research has gathered in its annals.
So in a way, you are saying that if a family member dies, one way the family members can contribute to the transformational process of dying is to do what? Is not to grieve?
I think missing and grieving is a normal process. I mean, you cannot help missing a person. But the thought is, if one can accept that love is a flow, in one way it's a flow of energy, and not to think only of yourself, but to continue that caring or sending out an affectionate response. And if one can really believe that the person to whom it's being sent can feel it, I think this would make a tremendous difference to the grieving process. To grieve and miss a person is normal. But if one goes out in a feeling of caring, many people feel that they get the feeling of caring back in return. But for that, they happen to be saying, I'm lost, I'm alone.
You know, Dora, it feels right, except when I work with a patient and, you know, if they lose a child, they're pulling their hair out, and it's if they say, yes, I want to, but it doesn't seem to work for them.
Because they're only thinking of themselves in the physical world and feel that is all, and they have lost the child. If the child was sent to Seattle from New York, they would have a different feeling. It's a finality of death, which they accept.
What can you suggest then?
First of all, that if one reaches out in one's own emotion, a feeling of affection towards that person, you projecting the feeling of affection and not being lost completely in the sorrow, it shifts the weight of the sorrow. Mm-hmm. And we are doing something. A person who just indulges in complete sorrow is really indulging completely in their own feeling, and they feel it's right. But if a person feels that there is another consciousness which is dear to you, I think this natural flow of affection doesn't only come at once, it becomes a part of one's life.
So in that sense then, that perspective allows me almost a self-healing to occur, because I continually go outward in my caring, and I don't pull in my own bereavement and sorrow. And when I pull in my own bereavement and sorrow, I almost get depressed, and in this sense it almost avoids that secondary depression that would occur following a death.
I think that is true, and let us deal with what we can do. I mean, there are many different senses of loss, for instance. One of the hardest, as you brought out earlier, is probably losing a child for many people. Because one has no sense, if one loses a child, that the relationship is finished. If a person dies one's own age, one does get a sense that this is a more normal, a normal ending. But even if a child has died, if he can accept it as a moment of happiness and a working out of a relation in such a way, and if he do not feel guilty, this is the main thing. If he do not feel guilty about the other person's dying, I think you can say, I'm happy to have had that relationship, and my love will continue to flow towards you.
I would agree that perspective is very helpful. At the same time, many people, especially if their child dies, let's say it drowns in a swimming pool, what they do is they say, or if they feel they were a bad mother or father, there's a large process of guilt, or sometimes there's even a sense of resentment that if a spouse dies, they're leaving with taking care of these kids. Both are, and how would you help the parents or a spouse that way to deal with that loss?
I think the first important person to help is not the husband and children. It is the person, as I have done many a time with our cancer patients. It is the mother who is about to die, to leave her small children. That's before a person dies. That is a very hard worry. What we tell the mother is to relax and to promise, if possible, to bring them into a relationship with another person who can look after the children before the mother dies. Am I making this clear?
Okay. So now what you're saying, let's look at the dying adult for a moment. Or you're saying, one, really look at what are your sense of responsibilities, where you feel responsible for others, sort of finish those. It's finishing old business. That's a major part. The next part, how can a person who is conscious and is aware that they are on a dying path, that they are dying, what can they do to allow their transition to be most comfortable? Are there things they can do?
I think if they can arrange, and this, a sense that they are handing over, this is a very good way of putting it. Okay. I'm thinking of a case of a cancer patient we had, of a young mother with 3 small children. She resisted dying very much till we talked it over, and she realized that she could make arrangement for her own parents, am I making this clear, who would be very willing to take over for how long a period as possible the caring of the children, and make her husband as comfortable like that. And as the pain increased, we suggested to her that she should every day, while she was alive, send out that love to both her parents and her children, and think of her life flowing out of her in a peaceful way, and that in the future, because there was a great love between them all, she would be able in some ways to affect it. But that she could die with a peaceful state, in a peaceful state of mind. And really, towards the end of her life, when the cancer pain became very severe, she wanted to go. And if a person can really completely say, I'm ready to go, it makes the transition very much easier for herself, but for everybody in the family.
Now let me shift for a sec to a more health professionals. What can health professionals do, let's say if they want to do therapeutic touch or other things, by which they can facilitate a peaceful dying process?
At first, the health professional can send, according to therapeutic touch method, energies in to the other person. The health professional is letting the flowing idea and a flowing movement to let the person have that sense that the transition from the physical life can be a peaceful one. This is very important as an intent in the health professional, because the health professional very often can provide more energy, as the health professional will have less sense of loss than the parents. Mm-hmm. And I think if they can all talk it over, the parents and the health professional, so that the person who is dying really, for instance, if they haven't been in a good relationship with their family, they can really make the effort to bring the family together and say, let us go in peace, and let us give forgiveness, whatever pain we have caused one another. And I think this is the attitude which makes for a passing which will not be a bad memory for children or people. It will be a peaceful memory. I think if children are present, this is very important.
Now, here I think I run into a difficulty, because in medicine at least, or when you work with people, some people have a very poor medical prognosis which may lead them go to death. So and now I'm caught, how can I give permission to let go without at the same time blocking the potential that they could still grow?
Some people defy all medical diagnosis because they have a sense that they have a mission to fulfill. They have a tremendous sense of being alive. And I think those people, even if they have a poor medical prognosis, with the help of health professionals or even with their own will, can at least often prolong their lives way beyond what the medical diagnosis says, because they have a sense of purpose which they wish to fulfill. And I think that sometimes prolongs the life if they continue, to fulfill that purpose. That isn't true for everyone, okay, but I've seen it enough in a life.
So in that sense, once they finish the purpose, then they can also be at peace.
That's right.
And that goes right back to the earlier case of the mom, where you said the mom was concerned about a daughter. Her purpose to be alive almost was to do something for her child.
Children.
Once that was solved, she was free to go.
That's right.
Now I would want to shift to one more area of death and dying. Sometimes, especially if some older people seem to die, they are almost like they're just in and out. And sometimes you see a dying person who no longer behaves like the loving parent you thought they were.
I think that's very common, and it brings a great deal of sorrow. I think in many older people, the emotional and mental quality has deteriorated to such an extent that one can see, what one can rather feel, that the real person isn't there. And I think that in such cases, the consciousness of the real person is already in this other level of consciousness. And what carries on is the strong will of the physical body to survive. The physical body, without interference of the mind, has a will to survive. And I think, therefore, the nice qualities aren't there. It's just the physical body carries on without the interconnection of mind and emotions which make up the personality. I've seen many cases of that.
And that makes it real difficult sometimes for the family members, because it's hard for them to perceive that. It's hard for them to perceive, here I had a loving mom, and here I have this kind of other
Well,
person.
I think in the family relationship, when I've talked to them about this, they immediately feel this is true, and they continue to think of the mother as they once knew it, for instance, and so continue as much as they can to feel the affection to the real person and realize this is a momentary aberration, which nobody can help.
If I want to pull it all back together again, the major steps then in the death process, at least for the family around the person, is to send a kind of loving energy and to resolve, in a sense, the resentments and the conflicts the family had, as if one gives permission. And yet it's sometimes very difficult for people to do. How do you, almost if you've been angry with the person for years, now you're almost asking a miracle for the person to sometimes forgive.
If you feel that you can never forgive and are always angry, you'll continue this relationship life after life, and you'll be tied to that person till you have learned that lesson. So if you realize that one life and is a transition one from the other, you will try to see that the person may have wronged you very, very much. But the wrong becomes a mental image in your own field. You have made in your own mental field an image of the wrong, and the other person may have grown out of it. And thus say, I have been wronged. Am I carrying that in a mental image which makes me unforgiving? Or am I going to see the person as they really are? And am I going to make an approach for forgiveness? That's the only way to break that link.
So in that sense, by letting go of the angers, the resentments before the death, I essentially can stop the escalating kind of karmic
That's right.
cycle.
And finally, a person grows spiritually by that. They often are deadlocked in one life by just hanging on to that sense, a mental image of revenge and hate, which is based on one or, say, a few episodes. In death, the important thing is to think of a flow.
And for you then, that sense of flow, that sense of sending caring, is one way to break.
At least, not necessarily if you just hated somebody, you can't say that you care for them. I completely accept that. But you can say, I have made the mistake to hold that image for so many years in my life, and this has been wrong. Let me send thoughts of peace to a person, and that I probably have been part of to blame.
And in that sense then, I can do that process whether the person is dying, or before they're dying, while they're dying, or from this perspective, 10 years after they have died. It really makes no difference now. So at any time, so even if I had a death 10 years ago, I have those strong feelings, I can still, in a sense, send that kind of caring and letting go.
Letting go of for myself, if it's from an even selfish point of view, to have such an image of hate stops your spiritual development.
I want to just clarify a bit more what exactly happens once the person has gone to the other side and has already felt some of the family feelings, the grief. What continues to that consciousness?
Well, I said he would be basically the same personality, with all the good, with all the interest, with all the selfishness. So if that's what I can talk about the personality. But the person who has many, many interests will find a completely new view of the world he or she can explore. And most people have somebody whom they know ahead of time. They will introduce them to the new world. I mean, it is a different world. It isn't a duplicate in every way of this world. So a person really has to be helped to understand it. Some people are much slower than others, and so they really stay very often very close to their family because they feel so uncertain. And I think this openness of mind of the family allows the person much more freedom to explore. What I think will strike the person who has passed on is not only that the world is so brilliantly colored and in light, but I think a lot of the inhibitions in this world aren't there. One can perceive and become sensitive to what the other person is feeling and not the shame which other people in this world can exhibit. So you can make a direct relationship or friendship or the opposite, because you are feeling in a true way a reflection of what they feel in yourself. So it's a much truer world in many ways, and people have to get used to it. I think what the person can do in this particular state of right after death is explore this new world, adjust to relationships. I don't think he can work out his relationships in this world. He can expand them.
And then in a way he would almost come back in this world to once again work out the relationships.
The relationship of bitter hate particularly, or great love. The bitter hate, till we can see through it that we are part of that experience, and we can say, I have nothing to do with it. And you can not love a person, but you can say to the state, goodwill, and I will not harbor these images which I sometimes have built in my life for 20 or 30 years. And it's always a one wrong a person has done, and that other person has changed. This is a possibility to work out in the other world.
So you're saying, in a way, that if a person is dying and if they are still conscious before they're dying, that one major piece they can do is work at forgiving the people who they perceive have wronged them. Because in the forgiveness of those people and to reconnect in a caring way to those people I leave behind, I allow myself to be freed up. And vice versa then, are you saying, that the family members around, their biggest contribution is very similar, to forgive and to send caring so they can go on their way of their own development.
It is the feeling of letting a person go. Besides the caring, the important thing is let a person go.